Let's record. Alright, yeah, so last week, we had an issue where if your player is at the ground, right, he's kind of stuck on the ladder. Let's see if I can. Yeah, he's kind of stuck on the ladder, right, until you press jump, and then he has to jump off, right? And that's not really the behavior we want. We want it such that if the player is down on the ground and he's touching the ground, right, we want him to be able to just walk off, right? So and requiring people to jump off a ladder is actually it might not be the behavior you want for a ladder as well. So let's go to the player movement, but I guess that's the behavior we have. I don't think it's wrong to not let people do, just walk off a ladder normally. But so yeah, one change we can make here is we can say that here we can say that if not touching ladder or jump pressed, right? So if you press jump or if you're not touching the ladder anymore, the other condition, right? We can add a different another condition which is touching ground, which is grounded, I guess. Right, and then we can say if this is grounded or it's not touching the ladder, or jump is pressed, and we need to put brackets because it's grounded as a function. Yeah. And that should fix the issue, hopefully. Yeah, that fixes the issue. I mean, yeah, another thing you could do that I'm not going to do because it's going to be more of the same. More of the same stuff we've kind of covered, right? Is that our sprite actually has some climbing animations. So yeah, I don't think it's making it as a matter of giving our animator, right, the state of is it grounded, and then you just create a few more states for climbing ladders, and you figure out the transitions properly. Yeah. And that's the other thing that we can do on ladders. Okay.
So now you can go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just wanted, yeah, I mean, I just needed to say those things anyway, lah. Recording now, so. Okay, so there are a few things that we still want to maybe implement, right? The first is currently we have an issue, right, where our player can kind of die by jumping off, right? But doesn't there is no real system to handle this, right? In reality, the player is just falling down and down and down and down and down and down. So we want to make it such that our player, maybe loses a life whenever that happens. So our player movement code is already very overloaded as is, right? So let's, instead of putting everything on the player movement code, let's create a new code called player health, right? Player health. So player health is going to have a very simple interface, right? We're gonna keep track of the health, and maybe we can also make player health do a respawn, right? So health can only be integer values. So let's say let's make it a public int. Lives, right? Is 3, maybe. And then let's keep track of our position trans. Yeah, let's keep track of our position vector tree. Vector tree position, and this can be private. Right, because we're not going to set this via the editor. We'll call this not position but respawn point. Hmm. Oh, hi Leon.
Hello, Daniel. What game are you making? I was looking at the one you said. There's some card games starting.
Oh no, not the
This
one
is
I sent.
platformer, right?
Yeah, we're making a platformer. Still from the previous
It's
few
cute.
videos. Yeah.
I've made some platformers, but not using Unity, using GameMaker back then.
Yeah.
Easier, but it's always good to learn something new.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, back to what we were originally doing, right? Uh, when so when we start, let's just keep track of our position, right? And let's set it to the respawn. So let's say let's set respawn to our position, right? And then update can just say if our player character should be dead, right? So if it's below the ground. So in this case, how the grid is like how the main game is drawn, right? Is that okay? We have a nice grid, so it has a layout of it's a grid size of 1, but usually the grid won't be shown, right? Is we go to a main camera, and it says our size is 5, right? So that means that from the center, which is at 0, 0 right now, if you go down, uh, right, if it goes up 5 units and it goes down 5 units. So size is actually the vertical height. So in this case, I will say that if transform dot y dot position, right? Position dot y is less than I can get the main camera. You can actually get a reference to the main camera, and that might be a better way to do it. Minus camera dot main dot tran- dot orthographic size. Yeah. Yeah, you can actually do it this way. And then we say that if you're below the screen, then below the screen, then you die, right? So, okay, so how do we talk about death? In this case, I'm going to write a new function. I'm going to call it die. So to die, what we're going to do is we have some sort of game over code, right? So let's I'm not going to implement game over now, right? If lives become 0, right, game over. Then lives we can decrement lives, right, by 1. So that's minus minus lives. Or lives minus minus. Yeah, so I'm just gonna write die here, right? And then for instance, you can have some sort of, right? Some sort collision checks, right? With enemies, right? Maybe. We don't have any enemies, so there's no reason that we Alright, so I'm not gonna actually write these collision checks. And then we say that once you die, let's set our transform back to our position, right? Back to the respawn point. Okay, so now, okay, if we jump off, it still doesn't really work. And that's because we haven't put the script on our player yet. So let's put the script on our player health. Yeah, so now you see when you jump off, it's kind of very sudden, but you get jolted back to the place where you started, right? So if I walk all the way here, then I jump off. Oh no. Okay, we should also just set the velocity, right? Do a bit of velocity setting, make sure it's 0. Because right now the physics engine is being very wonky on Unity. Don't actually know like what's the best way to fix this, but yeah, I don't actually know what's the best way to fix this. But if you go
Maybe
down towards the
Daniel.
ground fast enough, you kind of just clip through it. Maybe one way to do it is to just set some limit to how high the velocity can be. Again, not gonna do that. Just gonna accept some bugs. Features. Yeah. Then let's here we can just get our rigid body, right? Get our rigid body. Rigid body 2D. And then we can just say that set its velocity to vector 2.0. Yeah, and that should fix the issue that if we die from jumping too fast, then right we clip through the ground when we respawn. Okay. Yeah, it's quite nice. And I'm like, I feel okay, about getting the component every time because it's not like you're dying like 60 frames a second, right? 60 times a second. Yeah, that's the issue fixed. And now you're at -2 lives.
Can you go back to the script?
Okay.
What this does is it sets your velocity to 0.
Yeah, it sets your velocity to 0. Like, I guess this is one way to sort of avoid bugs because you can imagine that, like, in some games, right, if you preserve velocity, when you die, right, you can, like, strategically die and then, like, have a very high outwards velocity at your checkpoint, right, and some weird behavior can happen. It might be a fun game mechanic if you can, like, make it work. Yeah, like, previously we created a field, right, and we said that, in fact, we can also do that here. Right. Private, excuse me. Private rigid body 2D, RB 2D. And as again, I'm just gonna say new so that Visual Studio doesn't complain that doesn't give a warning that we're overwriting rigid body 2D. Then then here, right? You can just say RB2D is equal to We get component RB2D. In fact, this is a bit better because getting a component in the object is it's a bit more expensive. So this is probably actually better. But it doesn't really matter in this case. Yeah, but this is saying the same thing. Hmm. Okay.
Can I look at the script again?
Alright.
For some reason, the
Yeah?
rigid body with the small letter R is
Yeah. It's
has a
underlined, right?
problem.
Yeah. Okay. Like basically what's happened, right, is that in some older version of Unity, I think you used to already have the rigid body of your object as a thing, right? Like the transform. Transform is actually a component secretly, right? Transform is secretly a component. But in this case everything has a transform. So Unity just lets us refer to transform, right, by saying transform. Uh, what I think happened was that maybe historically rigid body was the same, right? But then they decided to not, that not every object needs a rigid body, and so even though you might have a rigid body field, right, it might not be set. And so if I'm defining a new private rigid body 2D, right, it's like I'm overwriting the previous one that was defined in there. So that's why I just say new private rigid body 2D. And that's the only reason this new exists. Both will work. It's just that if you don't write new, the editor will complain. But it will still run.
Alright.
Yeah, everything will still run. Yeah, okay, so we have to create some game over code, right? We have to create something that says if lives equals 0, and then the game is over. In this case, and we also should have something that displays the lives. So we can do either of that first. I think we should do the one that displays the lives first, because it's going to be easier to talk about that than to talk about making a game over screen. Like, to talk about that first, because both of them are UI. Right? So in this case, let's create UI and text. Right, and it's gonna say new text for now. So let's go to the game window and it says new text in the bottom left corner. So the way UI works in Unity, right? Because if you've realized, Unity actually lets you play in many different screen resolutions, right? It doesn't actually specify a screen resolution. So where Unity places text is not always on the same place every time, right? The way Unity tries to do it is to make it more reasonable, right? For you to make a interface that works on any possible screen resolution. So in this case, this new text isn't moving, and that's because, yeah, you see that for UI elements, instead of a transform, we have this thing called a rect transform. Let me make this text white and let me make it really large so that it's perhaps more clear what we want to talk about. The text has disappeared because we need to give it some more height. Like, that's one of the things I don't really like about Unity's text system. If the height is not enough, right, your text just disappears. Very unintuitive. So, yeah, you see that instead of a transform, we have a rect transform. Rect transform, basically lets you say that instead of choosing a position, right? I want to say that okay, let's put this in the top left, right? I can decide that, oh yeah, I want to put this in the top left. Or I can say that I want to put this on top, and then it gets put on top, right? I can say that I want to put this here, I want to put this here, right? Even I want to make it cover the entire screen, right? In this case, it will be centered because text is, oh, it's not centered. I see. So, in this case, let's say that we want to put our text in the bottom left corner, and I'm going to change the width back to 600 and the height back to 100. Right? And I want to align this text in the bottom on the left. Yeah, so I say that I have this on the bottom left, and you can also set the pivot to the bottom left, right? So rough diagram of what this means. It's open paint. Is that I have my screen, right? So if your pivot is on the bottom left, and your anchor is on the bottom left, right? That means that you specify the position of your pivot with respect to your anchor. So you'll have to specify this position, right? If your pivot was in the center, you'll have to specify this distance, displacement, I guess, from the bottom left, from the anchor to the center, right? If your anchor was the center, and your pivot was also the center, you have to specify this distance, right, from the anchor to the pivot. So, of course, here, it's important to know, like, it's important to just think about, like, which one of these makes the most sense, right, when we're specifying a place for our UI element. In this case, if we want to have it on the bottom left, it makes sense to just talk about the distance from the bottom left of the thing to the bottom left of this, right? Okay. So, yeah, as we see here, it's completely flush to the left, and I find this a bit unnatural. Maybe you do too. Right, so I'm going to change the position X to 10. Yeah, so another difference between rect transform and transform, this is in pixels. Let's set this text to the text lives :3, right, for now.
I guess on different screens, it will
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
sizes.
Yeah, so now we see on different screens, right? Oh yeah, on a 4K screen, it'll be this small. I don't know if you can get the font size to scale with the size of the thing, actually. Right? We still have a problem that if you're playing on a, if you're playing on a 4K screen, suddenly your UI becomes very small.
Tiny.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a very good way to do it, or you have to like go manually set the height of the screen. You can just create a component, right, that says that look at the size of our screen and then try to scale it, right? Multiply these numbers by so much, multiply the font size by so much if it's a text. You can have a component that does that. I don't know if that's the best way, right? But that feels like a reasonable way to do it. Okay. So we need some way to update this live text, right? The way to do this, there's a way to do this that is that is nicer. But what we can have for now is that, right, one way we can do this is we can look at the player's health every single frame, right? But this is a bit, inefficient is the word I was looking for. But we'll need a behavior on this script anyway, so let's call it lives counter. Right, and let's also name our text to lives counter. I don't remember how we did this last year. Holy shit. Don't know if I did it the dumb way or the not dumb way. Okay, and then we can just say that we'll look for a player health, right? So private player health, then player health. Right, and how do we get the player health? We search for the player, and then we get the health of the player. So how do we search for the player? I don't think I've covered this actually. Right, search for an object, in this case the player, right? We can search for an object by tag, by name. Yeah, and those are, I raise my tone as if there's more than that, but it's only the tag and the name. Usually we find the player by tag. And there are two functions here, right? One returns a list of game objects, array of game objects rather, and one returns a game object itself. So find game object with tag. Yeah, the difference is one is game objects and one is game object, right? And in this case, we only expect one game object with the name player. So let's find game object player, and let's say that the player health is equal to this, but then we also have to get the component on this player, right? Dot get component player health. So the dumb way to do this is to every frame we look at the player health, and then we set our text to this. Oh yeah, we also need to keep track of our text. Text. Oh, Okay, so text is not in Unity Engine because it's in a sub package for the UI. So if I press alternate enter over text, it shows me that I can be using unityengine.ui. Yeah, and text is in there. So most UI components will be in there. So I'll say my text is equal to get component text. So so we'll say that my text equals lives colon, right? And then let's get our live and let's add my text dot lives, and let's hope that I don't have to do some, sorry, not my text, plus my text not equals, right? My text dot text equals lives colon, and we append to this our player health dot lives, and let's hope that it's not giving me an error. Okay, it's not. Yeah, okay. It's very nice. So it automatically converts this to a string, right, to some text. Okay. And this should be kind of a dumb way to do this, but also, since I keep forgetting, we gotta put this on our lives counter. So lives counter onto our lives counter. And then let's run. Let's see if it works properly. It works, and it's not actually terribly slow. Which is kind of the fear whenever you do something like that, right? It's a bit dumb, so it might be really slow. Yeah, and then you're at 0 lives. And now you're at -1 lives. And now you're at -2 lives.
You can go back to the screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I'm gonna do this in a bit of a different way. Right? So here, right, actually what we can do is we can say that, right, instead of doing this, we only really need to update the text when a player's life changes. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of like it's just a bit dumb that we yeah, it's just a bit dumb that our we I was about to say yeah, it's just a bit dumb that we have to set that every frame, right? So here we're gonna use what's known as an observer pattern. And honestly, I am reading about this right now because I know that we have to use an observer pattern, but I haven't done this in like forever. So let's go. Uh, So in general, we want to do this like whenever we have like some event, right, that happens and we have things responding to this event. This can be in your game logic. This is especially applicable in UI. Right, so to make an event on this, we have to define a delegate. So public, oops. So let's say player health change, player lives change, right? Change delegate. And then this takes in player health pH. And here we have a public event, right? A player lives change. Lives change delegate, player lives change. So this is our event. Here. Okay. And then in our die function, we can now call this event, right? Player lives change, pH. So what this does is we're going to tell everyone that we're going to tell everyone that oh sorry, not pH, this, right? We're going to give it this player health object. So this is going to tell everyone who wants to know about this, right? That our player health has player lives has changed. Okay. So now in our lives counter, instead of doing this, what we want to say, right, is we want to say void on player lives change, right? It doesn't actually matter what we call this. This is not not a special term for anything, right? And then we keep track of the player health, pH. So yeah, in this case, I can actually remove this player health over here. Oh, I still have to kind of use it up here, but I'll work that out later. Right, I'll remove the player health here, and I will say that let's set our let's set our text to this. Right. Okay, and then I can actually delete update because we don't need to do something every frame, right? We are only concerned about what happens when a player's life changes. Right? So now we can say that player health, right? Now in start we can say player health pH equals this. Right? And then so we say pH dot player's lives change, right? The event we add we add this function to our event, to this event. So weird notation, right? It's have we done plus equals? Are you familiar with plus equals, right? Plus equals is shorthand for we add this to this. And that's about it, right? The reason I store this in a variable here is that actually we have to call our player lives change event when the game starts because we need to set our lives properly, right? If our lives are 5, I don't want it to be stuck at 3, right? I don't want this to be stuck at 3 if we set our initial lives to 5. You don't want to have to update both of them at once. So instead, here, okay, shit, it's not working. Right, so instead we gotta do it at the start. Okay, so let's figure out why it's not working. Go to player health. Okay, so firstly, I see that we have a problem because my text is not defined yet, right, when we do this. So yeah, it might be crashing because of that. See if that fixes anything. Yeah, okay, that fixes everything. So what happens is we are calling this function, right, on player lives change before we set my text to this. And because this thing references my text, right, it finds that there's nothing there and then it complains and then this stops running. That's basically what's happening. Okay, so yeah, so I'll leave it here again. About actually, I'll talk through what we just did again, and then I'll leave it here for a bit. So what we did is that we set up a event on the side of player health, right? We do this by setting a delegate. This actually kind of says like what when we call our player lives change event, right? Then what types go in and what types come out, right? So in comes the player health. So when we call this player lives change event, right, we pass it a player health, which is actually this, right? This refers to the current player health that is this object. And then we set the right, and then over here at lives counter, which I'm gonna drag to this side of the screen and hope that that works better, like that. Yeah. Okay. Right. We create a function that responds to this player lives change event, and we add it to this event list. Right. To this notification list, basically. And we say that, okay, yeah, whenever player lives change, we call this. And in fact, if you have several different things that are updating whenever a player's life changes, right? Then we can have all of them listen to this. One possible use is if we have the camera, right? If we want the camera to do a screen shake whenever the player dies, or to do a screen flash whenever the player dies, or if you want there to be a blood splatter whenever the player dies, right? Kind of thing. Those should not really be on the player themselves. We should make them on. We should make these events, and then if we delete this entire lives counter, right? It doesn't matter if we decide, hey, we don't want a lives counter anymore, right? Maybe we just have it be one life, right? And have the player just die when he dies, right? We can just set lives to 1 here, and we can just delete this entire lives counter text. So that's very convenient. And that makes it very easy to quickly adjust things. So that's events. What other stuff can I talk about today? Okay, let's make a pause screen. Now we have a lives event. Right, let's make a pause screen. And in fact, one of the things about making a pause screen is that it's also about making when you make a pause screen, it's very similar to making a game over screen in a way, right? So let's create for our pause, let's create empty. Let's create a panel. It's completely white. Let's have it. But the defaults are that it's as large as the screen. I think those are good defaults. Let's call it pause. Pause panel. And we can create a child of this, right? That is our pause text, right? So let's have it say paused. Let's have it really large. Oh, I remember how we got it not to I remember how we got it not to set the text to the correct size last year. And by I remember, I mean I know roughly how we did it, but I don't remember the exact function we used. Okay, so let's set the pivot to the center, let's set the position to the center, and let's hope that works out. Okay. It's left aligned here, it should be middle aligned. Right? We should middle align it, and we should middle align it like that. In fact, we can have it stretched to fill the entire screen, right? That's perfectly normal, alright? Let's do it like that. And then maybe we want a resume button, maybe we want a quit button. Okay, then it doesn't make sense to put this text so far down. I'll move it up a bit. -100. Then let's create some buttons here. So to the so UI button, and I'll move it down, like move it down. I said 20, 30. Right, and this will just be our resume button. And the text on this button can say resume. Button should have a text component, I think. Oh no, okay. The text is a child of the button. Okay. Okay, under canvas, if we use UI scale mode as scale with screen size, yeah, now the thing will be like big enough when we do 4K UHD. Yeah, that's the thing I remember now. Right? If you change UI scale mode to you have to go to the canvas, right, which is automatically created whenever you do any UI thing. Right?
Right.
And you say
Yes.
scale with screen size, and screen match mode, I think you can set it to match the height. Right? Because the height is kind of the thing that scales. But yeah. And now when your game becomes a lot bigger, right? When your game becomes a lot bigger, your UI doesn't change in size. And you'll be making your game with some sort of reference resolution, right? The default's 800 by 600, which probably is not what you're targeting in 2021. But okay, so note that I've created this text and this resume button underneath the pause panel. Right? So if I disable this pause panel, right, you see that everything is not selected. And if I enable this pause panel, you see that, right, everything shows up. So we'll be using this to show to pause and resume, right, everything. the control pausing and resuming of everything. So we are going to need something to keep track of our pause and resume logic. So we can put this under our canvas, I guess. I guess we can put this under our canvas. Yeah, so let's create a C# script. Let's call this pause controller. Let's call it yeah, so under pause controller, our pause controller is going to have a boolean, right, which is paused and unpaused. Private bool is paused. So by default, the game is not going to be paused, right? So let's say that this is false. So now we can see that we can go to in our update, right? We can see if the pause button is pressed. If the pause button is pressed, we pause the game. If not, we resume. No, if the pause button is pressed, we change the pause to unpaused or unpaused to paused. Right. So let's see if we have a pause button defined. Let's go to project settings, input manager. Okay, we don't really have we don't really have a button for pause that is defined. So let's create one. Under your axis, you can set the size to 31. And you now see that there is a new item created. By default, it's a clone of the previous item, right? Previous axis. So let's just call it pause. And no negative button, and let's call it escape. And let's hope that let's hope that it doesn't cause any issues with controllers. Okay. So let's save this. And let's go back to our thing. Right, so we need to get the button, right? If input dot get. Oh, we can refer to pause with a key code as well. That's also a way to do it. Get button down. Pause. Alright, and I called it with a capital P, so I'm going to refer to it with a capital P here. If the pause button is pressed, if is paused, we'll just create two functions here, right? One will be called pause and resume. No, didn't mean to do that. Private void pause. Excuse me. Have it not autocomplete? Okay, pause. You gotta press escape. Yeah, so pause and resume. Okay. C# wants us to rename it with capital letters at the end of their names. Yeah? Pause. The easiest way to pause the game, right, usually, is we are going to set the timescale to 0. So the timescale, right, is equal to 0. And when we resume, we set the timescale to 1. In actually both of these cases, right? Both of these cases, we can actually
you can-
combine. We can actually combine both of these cases, right? We can say if is paused 0 else 1, right? So you can use a ternary for this if it's paused 0 else 1, right? And we can say set pause, right? Toggle pause. Okay. Then we can enable our pause UI as well. So let's keep track of our pause panel, right? So private but private bool. No, private game object. What am I? I'm clearly not enough sleep, by the way, today. Pause panel. Yeah. Actually, we'll have it public because we'll drag this in our editor. Okay, so instead of if it's paused, I will just say toggle pause. So we also need to pause panel dot set active is paused, right? And actually here we do need to toggle the pause. So is paused is equal to not is paused. Right? So if is paused is true, we set it to false. If it's false, we set it to true. And I'm going to make this public as well because there, as we'll see later, we'll need to call this from outside. Right? When we press the button, we will need to call this from outside. So this will be our pause toggle. Okay, let's make sure it works. As usual, we need to put it on our object. On an object, we need to put the pause controller. I'll put it on the canvas. There's no reason I put it on the canvas. By right, you should probably be making a controller object to put this on. I just don't really want to. Yeah, so now when you press escape, it shows this screen. When you press escape again, right? When you press escape again, it shows the, right, it resumes the game. And there's actually a problem here, right? Is that I can still accept input when the game is paused. And that's a bit of a problem. What I'm going to do here actually is that I'm going to create I'm going to create an empty game object. I'm going to call this controller and I'm going to put our pause stuff over there. Right, so that I'm not like overloading the canvas. The canvas already has so much stuff. So I'm gonna put this on the controller, and I am going to go to the player movement, right? And now we are going to update player movement to check if the game is paused as well, right? So this player movement, now we will need to keep track of a pause controller. We will need to keep track of our pause controller, right? And in our pause controller, we need some way for the outside to see if it is paused or not. So there's one way we can do this. We can set this to public. For now, I'm gonna do this, but know that it's not best practice, right? Best practice is to make a function that says public bool, right, is paused. Actually, you know what? That's best practice since I'm talking about it. Public bool is or the Unity way of doing it, right? Is actually the C# way of doing it is actually to give it a get set.
Daniel, thanks for your workshop. I want to go get it.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead. Don't.
Will
It's
this be
9.
later uploaded or something?
Yeah, I always push it to YouTube. I mean, there's only one person here today, so I think it's a waste if
Yeah,
I
but
don't.
I also like to look at how you do. Thanks for the workshop.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
So actually, what this does is we give it some getters, and we actually can make a private set. So we say that this set is private, but this get is actually public. Right? So you need to be the pause controller to change if it is paused, but anyone can see if you're paused or not. So that's how Unity does this. So so we are going back to, we did this so that we can change our player movement. Yeah. So now, as usual, when we have this component, we need to change our pause controller here. And then we need to find the controller. I should give this a tag. Right. Game controller. Okay. So this is game object dot find game object with tag game controller. And I say dot get component which of type pause controller. Okay, so now this is going to be even longer than what we have, but it will just be if pause controller dot is paused is not paused, right? So if not is pause controller dot paused, and I'm going to go all the way to the end here, and I am going to I'm going to put the close bracket. So this now checks if the pause controller is paused, right, before it lets the player do any movement.
So the bracket is all the way down.
Yeah, all the way at the end of the function. Yeah. Oh, I guess I didn't really clarify what this does, right? What time.timescale does. Have we used? Yeah. Remember here, right? We used a time.delta time, right? Actually, rigid body also uses time.delta time, right? You can think of it that way to figure out where a thing should be, right? The time between frames. And what time.timescale does is it makes it there's like an idea of the real time between frames and not so real time between frames, right? A scale time between frames. And time.timescale says that change the scale of the time between frames to 0. So whenever you call delta time, it will actually return you 0 times the actual difference in time, right? That's all it does, and that's why that's why it pauses the game here. Right. The main thing is that we can actually do some inputs while the game is paused. And that's usually not really what you want to happen. So right, so we just add a big if around all of our movement code.
Then for the pause controller, how come you put the 0 first then the 1?
Okay, so there's this is a construct, right? Colon question mark colon. Actually, have you
Why
done
not like 1,
programming?
0?
Have you done programming in any other language before?
I mean, it's kind of like a,
It's like a if else.
if it's paused, then
If it's paused, then 0. Otherwise 1. That's how you read this. So this is
then
then
how come you need to
otherwise.
do the how come you need to do that
Yeah?
line above it?
So I say if is paused, set it to not is paused, right? So what this means, right, is that if it's true, this will become false, right? I will set it to false. If it's false, I will set it to true. So I'm toggling whether it's paused or not. Does that make sense? Hope it does.
Then won't it do like the opposite for the time scale?
So time if the game is paused, right? Okay, so when you toggle the pause, right? First we gotta change the state, right? If it's not paused, we gotta make it paused. If it's paused, we gotta not make it paused, right? And then now if we made it paused, right? Then it is now paused, right? Then we set that to 0. And we set our time scale to 0. Does that make sense? Yeah, a bit. Like I think I almost got this wrong when I was writing this as well. But this should be correct.
For some reason, my game is
Yeah?
it's showing the pause screen.
At the start, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you come here. Make sure you have it disabled to start with. Just make sure you disable it in the editor. So that's the box right next to the name of the item. On the left of the name of the item. Okay. All compiler errors have to be fixed. Semicolon after method or accessor block is not valid. Oh, okay. Don't put a semicolon after this.
I've got an error that says object reference not set to an instance of an object.
Okay, so what is it complaining about?
It's about the player move, the if.
The
line.
pause controller is not set to a reference, right? So yeah, that's this line here. So we gotta set this. We gotta find the game controller, right? Which I set the tag of this controller object to. Right.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
And we have to
What's that controller?
It's just the empty game object. I just created an empty game object. I just put this on there.
object.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you put?
Why I put it on an empty game object?
I mean, do you have to put the script there?
Do I have to put the script there? No. I mean you can really put it on anything, alright? It's just that there is nothing it really goes on. So in a sense it makes sense to create a new thing to put it on. Right? Like it doesn't make sense to put it on the player, right? Like player shouldn't control like what's paused or not. So I have controller as like kind of what's the word? Just something, right?
Then what do I add for this controller?
Okay. So remember our pause controller script? was it? Did you put it on canvas where I put it? Yeah.
Yeah.
You can just move it from canvas to the controller. You can drag and drop, and then you set the tag of this to game controller.
Set the what?
You set the tag of the controller, which is underneath the name, right, on the inspector, to game controller.
Oh, the tag is by default there, is it?
Yeah,
Or you create it?
untagged. Yeah, it's by default untagged.
Oh, where did we create this tag? This game controller tag.
I think it was just created by default.
Right.
Unity just creates some stuff by default for you whenever you make a new scene. Okay, let's exit to save. So let's save.
Then there's a pause panel thing at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
In the
Oh,
controller, there's a
yeah.
pause.
So the UI, you drag it in. This pause panel, right? You drag it into here.
Okay. We haven't done the button yet, right?
Yeah, we haven't done the button yet. Yeah, the button's not supposed to work. So let's do that now. You see under button here, right? We actually have a on click. So on click is also a kind of event, right? So we can actually edit this in the editor as well. So we can go here, and we can say that in both the editor and in runtime, when you click this thing, okay, so let's drag the controller to here, and let's call the pause controller. Yeah, you can select a function like this and toggle pause. So maybe that was a bit fast, right? So that under on click, you add a new thing, right? And then it says runtime only. We will change it to editor and runtime, right? So that we can test it in the editor. And we will drag the controller to this thing, and you'll see that it has a thing for all the components on this controller, right? In this case, we have it. We select the pause controller and we select toggle pause.
Okay.
Okay, so now when we click on this, right, you should see that it actually resumes the game. Yeah. So that's how you implement the pause button. If I'm not wrong, the technology behind it is like exactly the same as the way we did the health. Yeah, does player health have let's see. Let's see if it's exactly the same. There should, no, you don't see this under player health. Maybe you have to do something to get the Unity editor to recognize this. Hmm. And game overs can be done in much the same way, but you have to be very careful, right? Because about letting people about the way game overs interact with pause, right? So if you say you game over and you set the time scale to 0, right? And suddenly, when you pause the game, right, and you game over, and then you pause the game and unpause the game, you'll find that the time scale suddenly becomes non-zero, right? And that's one way to get bugs in your game. It's one way to get bugs in your game. One one way actually, right, to make this work properly is you can actually do this in the animator, believe it or not. We can actually do this in the animator. Right. And now instead of like doing a toggle pause, right, we have paused and unpaused as a state, right, in the animator, and we can trigger them using what's known as triggers. Do I really want to do that? I don't think I really want to do that, but let's talk about it theoretically at least, and then let's do the not so nice way to do it. Right. So you can see that let me just make an arbitrary transition. Right, from here to here. And we can actually have the condition as a trigger. Okay, we can create a parameter which is a trigger. Yeah. And say pause game, right? Okay. Can say pause game, right? And then we can have someone trigger this, right? And we can say when pause game, right? Then player get left becomes player right. For this is just an example. I'm gonna delete this. Yeah, delete it. It's okay. No, also delete this transition. I delete the transition. Don't know. Oh well. Guess I'm not gonna delete that. I'm just gonna delete the condition. So dumb thing to do is game over panel is essentially a pause panel, right? Except instead of resume you have a replay, maybe. So I'm just gonna duplicate the pause panel instead, actually. Gonna rename it. I'm gonna enable it for now so that we see it. Rename it game over. Right. So game over panel is essentially a pause panel, right? I'm gonna change the color, like for fun. Yeah, like a pink. Change the text to game over. Right, and instead of the resume button saying resume, it can be a retry button. So let's make it say retry. And instead of having the game controller make it unpaused, right? On the instead of having this trigger unpaused on the button, we had trigger some sort of retry function. So, okay. So now let's make our game over. Let's disable our game over. Let's have our controller have a new script, and we can call it game over, right? Controller. Okay. Gonna complain for a bit while it actually creates things. I'm gonna drag this into scripts. And in this case, we can go to, in this context, yeah, let's open this up. Game over. So, we can just say is game. This also has a boolean, right? And as per before, we're gonna have this. We are gonna have this be publicly accessible, but only we can change it. So actually, right, we can actually have this also look at the player health, right? And we can have this update if the player health is 0, right, or less than 1. We can add a listener, right, to this to play this player lives change event, and we can have it just trigger a game over when the game is over, right? So again, I can delete this update function, and I need to create a void on live change, right? On live change. Then this takes in a player health, ph. Then we say that if we get the lives of this and it is less than or equal to 0, I say less than or equal to because there's no harm in saying less than or equal to, and it gets rid of like weird bugs where like maybe you hit an enemy and you lose 2 lives, right? You have a special enemy that makes you lose 2 lives. And then suddenly, oh yeah, it hits you to -1, so the game is not over, right? If you set strictly equals to 0. So over here, right? Let's say let's say that we make the game over, right? So this game over becomes true. And we also set our timescale to 0. And we also need to enable our game over screen. So public game object, game over screen. So we say that our game over screen dot set active true. Okay, so now, uh, under our pause controller, right? Under our pause controller, we need to keep track if the game is over, right? And we need to say that if the game is over, you can't unpause. And in fact, if our game is over, right, we also have to. The game shouldn't be over when your game is paused, but who knows what can happen with like interesting bugs. Okay, so over here, let's keep track of public game over controller, private game over controller. Let's just call it game over. Game over. Yeah. So over here, right? I say if not game over, dot is game over. Right? Then I pause. I pause or unpause the game. Okay, so yeah. So this should now set out. This should now cause our game to actually end when the game ends. Okay, so I was actually okay. So now this we need to put the game over controller on this. I need to duplicate this again. What happened was that when I was playing, right, when I was playing this, when I was running the game, I created new game objects, and those will get deleted when you pause, when you stop the game. Right, it's like that so that you can kind of test it, but also a bit, it's also a bit irritating sometimes, right? If you're not expecting it to happen. So I'm just gonna redo all the changes that we just did to it. Text should say game over. Right, and the button should say retry, which is actually under the text here. This text should say retry. Okay. And let's disable this game over controller. Oh, yeah, we also forgot to do one thing, right? We also forgot to add this behavior, right, to our player health. So to get the player health, you have to find game object dot find object with tag. The tag is player. We gotta get our player health. Dot get component. And then we have to take the event, right? So player lives change. And we add the on lives change. We add our on lives change function to it. So we say that when the player lives change, we also call this function, right? In addition to the one we called before. Okay. I'm going fast, but I will go back to that. I just need to check that it works. Okay, that's almost right, except it doesn't enable the screen because I have not dragged it to the screen. Yeah, I've not put this over here. So our game over, not, it shouldn't be called controller, it should be called panel. Okay. So back to the code, right? So yeah, again what we do is we add a listener to our player lives change event. Right, we add a new listener. Listener checks if the new lives are less than 0, and then they set the things you need to set, right? If they are.
So this player's lives change thing is from the other script.
Yeah, it's from our player health. Yeah, it's from our player health, right? Remember we defined the event. Player lives change. And basically whenever this happens, right? Every single function that we've added to it will be called. So it will call our lives counter, right? And it will call the same function. It will also call this function in game over controller. Does that make sense?
Oh, so different script can read from the
Yeah.
other script.
Yeah, so this is like quite helpful, right? Like especially if you know, for instance, you're doing an audio system, right? And you have like complicated audio logic and you have complicated game logic, right? And you don't want to or you know, maybe you have some achievement system as well, right? And the achievement system needs to know what's going on in the game, right? But if you did like a jump code, right? And then in the jump code you said, oh yeah, also by the way, you know, called our achievement system if you performed a especially tricky jump. Then it becomes very confusing, right? Instead, what this allows us to say is that our player health, right? We just set up a event, right? And we say that if our lives change, right? And nothing necessarily has to call this event. So in fact, if we removed everything that cared about our lives changing, our player health would still perform fine, right? It's just that everything that wants to listen on whether our player health is changing, now it knows, right? Whether our player health, like now it knows when our player health change. That's the rough idea behind us doing this. Right. In fact, you know, in a more complicated system, you might want to add more events, right, about the player's health changing. Like maybe you want an event for it decreasing, you want an event for it increasing, right? Like, oh yeah, if you got an extra life for whatever reason, we want to play a sound. Or if you lost health, we want to play sound, we want to have blood splatters all over the place. Uh, we want to move you back to the start. You know, all these kind of different behaviors. And it allows you to like separate the logic a bit. Okay, one last thing we need to do before the session's over. We need to get retry to work. So I'm just gonna put this in game over controller. It doesn't really fit, but I'm gonna put it there. Public void restart. Right. Restart game. And not gonna lie, I don't think there's a lot to teach here that that I won't scene manager. Right. So how we do it is we get our scene manager. Scene manager. Okay. It's complaining because scene manager doesn't exist in the scene using Unity engine dot scene management and scene manager, and let's load our scene. And we can just load the same scene, right? Get active scene dot we can get the name. We can get the build index as well, but we can get the name. Right. So yeah, you might notice that when we create the Unity project, right? It asks us to save sample scene. A Unity project can actually consist of multiple different scenes. And what a scene is that like it's sort of a different, subsection of this game that you go through, right? So you might have a scene for the main menu, you might have a scene for overworld, you might have a scene for different levels, right? For instance. And there is a huge system for transitioning between that, but I think I will talk about that more next lesson. More about that next lesson. So, but for our purposes, under game, under our game over panel, when you click retry, right? What we'll do is we'll just get the name of the current scene and we'll tell the scene manager to load the same scene. Right. So under retry button, we'll set this our on click to game. Right. It'll still be on the controller, but instead of the pause controller, it will be game over controller dot restart game. And let's just check that it works. Yeah, and it does actually go restart everything. We also have to set our time scale to 1. We also have to set our time scale to 1. Because apparently that doesn't reset when you change scenes. So game over controller. You can pause and unpause to fix it if this actually happens in your game, but we don't want to have oops. Time scale is 1. Okay. Yeah, and now if you die 3 times, right, you'll get back to the game over screen.
You have to tag the game over.
I put it on the game controller, so. Sorry, do you have to tag? What do you mean? I put it on the same controller, actually.
Oh, because mine was untagged.
Yeah, I gave it a tag.
No, I meant the game over
Yeah?
panel.
Panel? Oh no, I didn't give it a tag. I just dragged it into the. I just put it as a public field. Right here. So I put it as a field here. So I said public game object game over screen. Right? And that makes it such that we can set it in the editor. Right? So I just dragged the game over panel to
I
this.
didn't set it.
Yeah.
No wonder nothing happened.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's like always these kind of small things that you forget to do. Yeah, but that's how you restart the game.
Interesting.
In a day. Yeah. You restart the scene at least. Right. And realistically, you'll probably also have to go back to main menu option. Just not doing that. Not doing that until next week, probably. Yeah, it's about 10. So if you have any questions, I'll be staying here. If not, I will start the recording and I'll see you guys next week. It should be the last session.
It's funny how you did the dying part.